hungry now. There we go. Okay. Fucking battery died. Didn't know it was on battery power.
Humperdinck, Rupert Murdoch, he did a big job on it. He did a lot of research that no one would ever report on. And, you know, he did a lot of the stuff that I'm saying right now, like Pakistan, this and that, this.
So he came out with a paper that said that England, starting in the 50s, turned into Rebel 3 or Rigel 3.
Yeah, right here, Rigel.
Rigel 3.
Rigel sounds like something from... Fuck. I'm done. My brain's done. That sci-fi channel stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like with that guy, Michael Craig. Never mind.
Ancient Aliens?
I'm fried. I'm literally... it's not Babylon 5, it's something else. Okay. I'm fried. It's over for me.
So, Rigel 3 is now in England?
Yeah. He had a report of findings of all different kinds of insane abuse and insane cooperation with authorities in the court system, judges, cops. One of my favorite lines from a couple of years ago, when this stuff was starting to break out, I knew, after I watched Eyes Wide Shut, I went into a deep dive that within 10 minutes got right into grooming gangs, right into like having dogs fuck people in cages, like bad stuff, you know what I mean? Like stuff that you wouldn't even think of. Bad stuff. Really bad.
Sounds terrible.
I was right to that immediately, and I was like, are you kidding? And so I've always known these things have existed, but they're kind of coming out, disclosure is coming out, and maybe it's not being reported. But this guy's findings were, as what I'm saying is that there, I guess, 200, I guess in the last 50 years or whatever, 250,000, closer to 1 million, have been raped with judicial impunity. Cops. And I remember a story about there's a woman who's, and then cops would always say like, oh, she's a prostitute. No, you could get into this a lot, how they deny it, this and that, but that's too big of a topic. Yeah, it's too sickening to think about. But my favorite line ever was there was some woman who was indirectly being held against her will and being forced to perform oral sex on a guy in a car, but a cop went up there. And the woman she might have been complaining about it, I don't know, maybe she wasn't. This was someone who was under the power of a gang who was threatened, blah, 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 blah. But the cop went up, he's like, what the hell's going on here? And the response from the foreigner who was catching hand, he's like, nah, don't worry about it, she's just sucking my cock meat. And the cop was like, and he just left. So it was like, I don't think you were mating with the guy that got stabbed. It was like that. She's just sucking my cock, mate, and the cops just leaves. And it's too big of a topic to go into all of that. But but
the number is staggering.
The number is staggering, and it can only be done with the funding and the perpetual life-giving energy and funding of a government. It's too big to not be run by a government. So it's run by the government. And that's come out, and I guess there's outrage in this and that, but it seems to be a media blackout on the whole thing.
It comes down to the fact that you and I our minds are boggled by the UK, like falling apart, but when you have things like this happening,
These girls vote. And these girls have children who are damaged.
Right, it's generational.
It's generational warfare, so it's more hardcore than a world war. This is way more hardcore than anything.
Yeah.
Because it's unspoken.
It's unspoken, it's a long game.
It's invisible, it's a long game. It's genetic warfare, it's psychological warfare, it's war against women. Women are vulnerable to that sort of stuff. And but again, I'm still going to say that if you want to add it all up in terms of abuse, boys are by far more abused than girls. I'm going to say it. I don't care. I'm going to put boys are. Globally, boys are abused and trafficked more than girls. I'm just going to say it. And that's not a point. That's not a point to say, women this and I'm just saying, don't.
Alrighty. Don't know why the fuck that muted.
It's not like people just explain that away, but girls, and I mean that's a whole different. So, and that's fine.
No, they're all bad.
Yeah,
it's
they're
just
all
like
bad.
you said. If
They're
maybe
all red flags. They're all alarm bells that create. We didn't even call it a revolution, but
you just may
it's
not
so
hear
suppressed.
about it as much,
Yeah.
which is, I guess, wrong.
It's so suppressed and crazy atrocities, insane. I mean, like horrors that are so crazy they're laughable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that.
Yeah, laugh at a funeral.
It's wild, but it's apparently it's business as usual. And I'm not. What am I going to say? Get out in the streets and start killing everyone?
No.
It's not like you. It's not like even if you feel that way, you can even say that.
No.
Yeah, it's a hard place to. Oh, what are those? It's still business as usual.
I don't understand. I don't understand who lets that go down. I don't understand it.
Wow, it's a torturous system that forces it down everyone's throat. You don't do it just with one thing. You do it with many things over many years.
Before the palace, I used to always ask you, what's the point of people in, let's say people in power to allow things to happen and all this? I never I know a lot more because you've been educating me for years, but like, I never understand why people in power, I'm so stupid, I like think like, why aren't they fighting for the good and everything gets better? You know what I mean? Like, I used to always think that way.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way. It's like, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you fight evil and bring out the good? I'll never.
Well, the movies and TV and music have taught us that, but as we've seen, at least in England, it doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be that they not only allow it, they facilitate. Well, I guess this is illegal to say, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Nice.
Man, the UK needs to fix themselves.
That's a bitter pill to learn that kind of
Consider their own people the enemy. It's the bitter pill, isn't it? It's I don't like it. It's a bitter pill.
Hello, everybody. This is a fascinating discussion with a legend of underground MDMA synthesis, a character those well versed in the hive may be familiar with, named Methyl Man. He's best known for a write-up, but you can find online a link to it with the title Reductive Emanation of MDP2P with aluminum mercury amalgam and nitromethane. And this happens to be the exact process for synthesizing MDMA that was featured in the Steve Giddle MDMA episode in season 2 of Pharmacopoeia. Not only that, I have a vivid memory of sitting in that clandestine MDMA lab and scrolling through the Methyl Man write-up on my phone, watching it be implemented down to the finest details, including the use of a coffee grinder to mill aluminum to a fine powder so that it could be better amalgamated during the reductive emanation. The history of all these different techniques is very convoluted and difficult. Chemist named Ritter, who was then popularizing a synthesis that I believe was first featured by Strike in Total Synthesis 2. And I imagine that Strike was not the first person to employ, obviously he wasn't the first person to employ a Wacker oxidation, but I don't think he was the first person to generate methylamine in situ from nitromethane. And for those that don't know, because I imagine that there's a number of people who are already maybe tuning out a little bit, but I would advise you to maybe not tune out, because this is actually not the need for methylamine. Anyone who's watched Breaking Bad will be very much familiar with the fact that the acquisition of methylamine was a central plot point in that show. It was exaggerated to some extent. I think a lot of chemists rolled their eyes at how this was elevated to a insurmountable task that required train heists in order to secure a supply. There's a certain selection bias in the way that stories about underground chemistry are told. We tend to hear big stories or dramatic stories. Most of the stories on this podcast are people who got in trouble with law enforcement, went to prison, and are speaking to me in the wake of that because they've effectively served their time and there's no longer any risk associated with discussing it. Many of the people who never got caught are reluctant to talk about it. And many of the people that like to talk about these things have some kind of extreme relationship with chemistry. And one thing I really like about this conversation is that it's not that extreme. You have somebody who made a good bit of MDMA, but nothing ridiculous. He estimates a quantity that is somewhere between 6.5 and 11.5 kilos of MDMA. It's quite a lot by a normal person's standards, whatever that means, but he was actually doing this on a somewhat small-ish scale. 18 grams per synthesis, one synthesis every 1.5 days for 2 years, and was making a medium amount of money, $10,000 a month, and never got caught, never harmed anyone to the best of his knowledge, and was able to explore this fascinating chemistry, disseminate what he learned on the Hive, and then left the United States. The statute of limitations expired, and he's talking to me about his experiences. So I think this is wonderful. I think it's a really interesting story because you don't really hear stories like this ever. He discusses the impact of 9/11, the different ways that he would acquire chemicals using excuses like his mercuric chloride was being used in water analysis.
Head northwest.
The dangers associated with doing this type of chemistry, particularly in his bedroom where he was living. Another interesting fact is in the lab that I was filming in, where they were using the methylman synthesis, that was also in the bedroom of the person. Impact of 9/11, the different ways that he would acquire chemicals using excuses like his mercuric chloride was being used in water analysis. The dangers associated with doing this type of chemistry, particularly in his bedroom where he was living. Another interesting fact is in the lab that I was filming in, where they were using the methylman synthesis, that was also in the bedroom of the person who was doing chemistry. So another kind of interesting convergence. What is depicted in my show is almost exactly what is described in this interview, with the exception that on my show, the oxidation of the isosapyl is being performed with performic acid, but it seems that methylman was doing a whacker oxidation. The final and maybe most interesting thing of all is that all of this is coming from somebody with no formal education in chemistry whatsoever. The conversation is actually 18 grams per synthesis, one synthesis every 1.5 days for 2 years, and was making a medium amount of money, $10,000 a month, and never got caught, never harmed anyone to the best of his knowledge, and was able to explore this fascinating chemistry disseminate what he learned on the Hive, and then left the United States. The statute of limitations expired, and he's talking to me about his experiences. So I think this is wonderful. I think it's a really interesting story because you don't really hear stories like this ever. He discusses the impact of 9/11, the different ways that he would acquire chemicals using excuses like his mercuric chloride was being used in water analysis. The dangers associated with doing this type of chemistry, particularly in his bedroom where he was living. Another interesting fact is in the lab that I was filming in, where they were using the methylman synthesis.
Turn right. Turn right. Then, turn left.
Interesting convergence. What is depicted in my show is almost exactly what is described in this interview, with the exception that on my show, the oxidation of the isosapyl is being performed with performic acid, but it seems that methylman was doing a Wacker oxidation. The final and maybe most interesting thing of all is that all of this is coming from...
Turn left, then turn right onto the ramp.
The conversation is actually very non-technical for the most part, and I think a lot of that is derived from the fact that methylman is doing most of this entirely on the basis of experience, watching what causes things to heat up, what causes things to develop colored impurities, right? It's a purely empirical, non-theoretical relationship with synthesis that I always find fascinating to hear about. So I hope you enjoy this beautiful historical discussion of underground MDMA chemistry, and there's a lot more coming out soon. I'm really delighted that...
Turn right onto the ramp.
Because I'm familiar with your work. I actually, filmed this whole demonstration of your synthesis. It's probably one of the most famous of the Hive era syntheses oriented toward clandestine manufacture of MDMA, and I don't really know anything about your work other than this famous synthesis, so I would love to hear the story, your background, how you got into this, anything, if you're willing. I'd love to start at the very beginning, how you got interested in chemistry and go way back.
You are the man to share this with. I'll knock out the fanboy stuff super fast here. And obviously, I'm a huge fan of your work, and I think it's extremely important what you've been doing in terms of journalism and just keeping a hold on this kind of information, this psychedelic culture. Without your kind of efforts, much of it could slip away. So great job on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So when I try to think of the very first interest that I had in psychedelics, I have to think that I was influenced as a little kid because I grew up in the hippie era. I was born in 1962. So when I stop and think about it, I was surrounded by hippie people when I was just, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. My older brothers were hippies too. So I had an injection of that culture into my forming young mind, even at that age. So I don't, somewhere in there, I think there must have been some openness to the psychedelic experience that just kind of got absorbed. Childhood osmosis, I don't know. And so I remember being in high school and being extremely curious. There's a burning curiosity about this LSD thing I had been hearing about. And I actually I remember going to the school, like a high school library, to see what they might actually let high school kids read about that. And did find a couple of interesting books, and they only fueled my curiosity, right? Because the descriptions were very colorful and very dramatic sounding of the trips people had. So that only heightened my drive or my curiosity about these things. So that would have been when I was like 15 years old or something. And then you'll love this one. I do have a memory of reading a pamphlet when I was probably in 10th grade or something. So this would have been about 1977. The title was something like DMT, the Businessman's Acid, or the Businessman's Trip. I think the title was DMT, the Businessman's Trip. And it was actually an early attempt to give a DMT synthesis method, a clandestine one, I think.
Oh, wow.
That's from my memory. It was just like a 10-page little pamphlet or something. And I think I bought it in a pet shop. I don't expect you to know about this because you're a bit younger than me, but I thought you might find it interesting that I did see some kind of underground pamphlet in Southern California in like 1977. And that was really fascinating to read about, but it seemed so beyond the pale, like I'll never connect to that world. That just, because I was just like a 17-year-old kid, so I was like thinking I'll never meet people connected to that kind of thing. But it was deeply interesting at that time for me to read. And first psychedelic experiences when I was in high school, which I will admit freely was probably way too young. I should have waited until I was more of an adult probably, but when I was like 16, 17, I took my first couple of heads of acid or whatever, and they were very intriguing but very sort of scary experiences because I made the classic mistake of taking them alone. My first two acid experiences were taking it home alone like I was some kind of scientist or researcher, and I had no one to share the experience with, so I went into some dark places, even though I'm sure this is very weak acid I'm talking about, because as you're probably aware from other interviews, at that time, like the late 70s, there was a lot of people making the most money they could off selling LSD by making the hits very weak, but it was still enough to rock my little teenage mind, and so even though those first couple experiences were scary, it wasn't long before I started taking it with friends and bandmates and people like that. And it really changed the nature of the experience because I was with other people that were going through it. So it went from those first two being kind of scary to just absolute hilarity, the next several times with people. You can imagine 17, 18-year-old guys. I'm sure today they still cackle and laugh. I guess the next forward movement I can tell you about was around 1995 or so. I think it was when I had my first MDMA experience, and felt like a spiritual epiphany. It was just I was amazed that a drug that had amphetamine in the structure name could possibly feel like that. You know what I mean? And yet it did. And there again, I didn't have at first people to take it with. My curiosity was too powerful to let me wait, so I just took it alone a couple times. And of course, MDMA alone is not scary the way LSD was. But the last couple hours of it, I found myself craving personal connection with somebody, some physical touch, or even just talking to somebody. But it was like 3 in the morning, and I was sitting there, doing it by myself. So I got a taste of how powerful it was in making me want to connect with other people. So it was only a couple times by myself, and I realized I had to share that experience with someone else. I do know well how integral MDMA became in the dance scene, the rave scene, right?
And were you part of that? What were the circumstances of you trying MDMA?
Well, the circumstances were, like I say, I was so, after reading about it and hearing about it, having a couple friends take it and say, oh, yeah, you got to try this. That I looked into the structure, I thought, well, it's an amphetamine derivative. I don't really like speed. And my friend, or a few friends I was talking to, they were like, no, don't worry about that. It's not speed. Just trust me. And so at that time I was naive about chemistry, so I didn't understand that a pretty simple alteration on one molecule can result in another molecule with very different properties. So I had my doubts going into it, so I was just amazed when I took the first one. The effects that it had were very heart-opening. It was very, for me, it was very dramatic. And I also realized in those first couple trips, I realized, this stuff is going to be amazing for songwriting. And it was. I actually got on my gear and started writing some stuff, and it was incredible to write music on MDMA, because what it did is took all the normal the usual sort of filters and self-doubt and stuff that artists can easily fall into and apply to themselves. And the MA, of course, just sweeps those away for a few hours, and you're just completely open with yourself. So it made songwriting incredibly different and sort of better experience. And ultimately, I was kind of naive at the time, and I thought, that was one of the things that led to me wanting to make a kind of like a times of 5 of it. Is I thought I need this for songwriting because songwriters are 5 times better with it. So I had this sort of naive vision of, well, I can just take this every week or 2 weeks and just do a lot of songwriting. But at that time, I wasn't quite aware yet of how deleterious the effects are if you keep on punching a button. If you do it too often, which is a huge mistake pharmacologically. A lot of people made. But I learned pretty quick that you have to wait like at least a month. So I made a rule pretty quickly that, okay, I have to wait at least 1 month before I do this again, because I did understand, I had a basic understanding of the serotonin chemistry and stuff that I was reading about, and that, I didn't have to be told twice that if you abuse this stuff, you're not only not going to get high off it, but you're going to hurt yourself. So that, I took that lesson immediately and was patient and waited, I would wait a month and it would just be like what I was looking forward to. And, before long I was making arrangements with ladies to do it with me, and that's when I realized that this is what this stuff is for. And this is true. So getting back to the dance and the rave thing, I never did it in that setting. I did QCB and a couple other things in that setting, but I never did MDMA in that setting, and I'm glad I didn't, because I came to appreciate it and believe that its real function, its real role was as a sort of a therapeutic agent. And just like I intuited even at the time, if you did this even with 3 people, it might turn into a threesome. 4 people, it might turn into just an orgy or whatever. Just not out of lust, but just out of pure good energy or whatever. So I thought, okay, the way to use this stuff properly is to be with one other person that you either already love. I get emotional just talking about this stuff.
Yeah.
Or somebody that you really want to get to know better. And so, those experiences I had with ladies that I wanted to get to know better were really amazing. Even if it didn't result in a relationship that, came out of that, they were still